Yo, welcome to wNS9 Plus. I'm your host, Anthony DiNardo. With me, we got Tyler, we got Jim. We have a special guest for everybody tonight. We have the man from behind the scenes of Fangraphs Pirates prospect list that you all loved to trash this year. We have Eric Longenhagen on. Eric, welcome to the show.
How's it going, guys? Do you guys want me to turn my camera on? Is that a thing? Are you guys recording the video too?
We are, if you want to.
Yeah. It's your call, though. Yeah.
I didn't know. I got like semi bedhead from a midday nap still.
This is why we're a hat show.
Gotcha. Yeah,
it helps.
Also, bad hairline.
Flow, though.
Yeah, you know, it runs all the way down my back. Yeah, I was like now in my mid 30s now, like it's great. But yeah, when I was like in 9th and 10th grade and I had a full mane of chest hair, no one was like, "Oh, you have such a nice head of hair, Eric." No, it was why you're a high school freshman with a Joe Namath, like Robin Williams, full chest of hair. So but now I've been blessed with a good head of hair in my 30s still.
Must be nice.
It's starting to go, but yeah,
can't relate.
Nice.
Yeah, mine's pretty good too. I should just do no hat as well, just to show it off.
I hate everybody on this podcast right now.
Should we all take our hats off and just leave
in a convertible
now?
In a pool, in a Roman commercial?
I don't even know Eric, but I don't like him right now, and I know I hate both of you. So
I'm definitely not ripping on you. I mean, I got friends, and for sure, like it's coming for me. It's coming out in the shower, just in dozens at a time now. So any day now, it's going to start to pour out of me, I think.
And the problem is I have no desire to ever work out in my life, so I can't pull off the ball jack guy.
Like a thing that a compensation that I think you have to make if it would start to go, I feel like I would be more motivated to like get on the bike or the treadmill.
Just no desire to do any of that. So I'm just going to wear a hat forever.
Yeah, I need to get into hats, but the hats really make my nose look like the bill of the hat in profile because it's the same shape. I've got that Ray Romano nose. And so, yeah, like the two of them together, I just look like really like the MLB logo in profile.
Just face forward all the time and you'll be fine.
My dermatologist told me I need to start wearing it, though. Living in Arizona, like for 9 years, going on 9 years, like, my skin's starting to get pretty beat down from all the UV rays.
Yeah, well, that doesn't help when you wear one backwards all the time, too. So.
Right.
Right.
It looks slick, though. We're the Griffey watching generation, so.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Still the face of baseball.
Yeah.
But no, for real, welcome to the show. The reason we're bringing you on is, as mentioned, you did release the Pirates prospect list on Fangraphs, which, I mean, all of us, I mean, we love the prospect rankings. It's interesting to see where everyone's ranked on different sites and such and talk about it, and tear it apart somewhat. But I feel like the Fangraphs one particularly, it seemed to get a lot of attention this year. I'll put it that way on Pirates Twitter. A lot of hate, a lot of this seems right, this whatever, but it's very controversial. So it's like, let's get you on. Let's talk about this because I think there's a lot of people who want some answers. Why did you rank Nick Gonzalez so low, Eric, and others? So let's kind of get into it.
Okay.
I mean, I think we should start off with just like the top. Like let's talk about the people that people really are interested in first before we get to those things. So, on your top 100 list, Termar Johnson, Endy Rodriguez are back to back. I think they're like 21, 22. So you clearly have them like a 1A, 1B type situation. I guess let's start off with we know quite a bit more about Endy than we do Termarr Johnson. He played 15 games or so last year, so we got a little bit of a glimpse of him. But what 18-year-old second baseman, he's not a shortstop, he's a second baseman. So like, what is it about him that makes him a hair better than Endy Rodriguez right now?
So the Endy Termarr debate, it rang throughout the working the phones, working on the Pirates list. I have Endy ahead of Termarr. Tess Taruskin, who did the list with me, she's a contributor at our site. I let her call the ball because we thought it was even enough, and she just prefers Termarr's, what she thinks is greater upside. I think when you're really lining up the minors universally, Endy's skill set is so unique, and he's right there. That I prefer that. I prefer that proximity, and still think that he's going to be a really, really special player. I could see how if you said, Termarr Johnson maybe had an argument to be the first pick in last year's draft. I think you can make a justifiable argument for that. And if you dropped Endy Rodriguez into a draft, do you feel good enough about taking a guy like that, smaller guy, who's the ceiling on his power is maybe pretty limited? Take a guy like that 1-1. Does that feel right? So I could see if you're like apples to applesing it that way, how you can make an argument for Termarr Johnson. Now, I know scouts who have had like $4+ million evaluations on Termarr Johnson since he was like a 14-year-old kid. Okay, just playing in Georgia, the travel ball circuit in Georgia is so intense and well scouted, not just by pro scouts, but college recruiters. That you end up learning about these guys pretty quickly. Termarr's always really, really hit. Yeah, he doesn't have that prototypical high school baseball prospect body. He's not A-Rod. He's not Carlos Correa. He's not even Jackson Holiday or Drew Jones, right? Those two guys have that statuesque 6'3"-ish frame that's got room for another 30 pounds without losing any kind of mobility, that type of stuff. And that's not Termarr. Termarr's, a little fire hydrant. But he's just hit for so long. His track record of performing against like really good high school kids in Georgia and on the showcase circuit is very, very long. Now, is there risk there? Yes. I don't know what's going to happen with his body. You do see some of these guys who are built like this at that age already. And when they're 22, 23, typically on average, I did a study on shortstops, like probably going on 5 years ago, high school shortstops, what they weigh when they're drafted out of high school, and then what they tend to weigh, either the ones who matriculate to college, guys like Dansby Swanson, or guys who, they're 21 and what their listed weight is. And typically you're adding about 30 pounds in that age 18 through 21, 22 window. And it's hard, to picture Termarr with another 30 pounds on it because he already is kind of maxed out. But, he's got monster bat speed. There's big aggressive lift in his swing in the bat path, and just the way he swings is with ill intentions. And he's long to the ball a little bit because he's got to scoop. You got to have that length. But when you're only 5'9" or about whatever he is, he's in that area. Your swing really can't be long, so you get to have this noisy, crazy bat wrap with this uphill swing. And like it works. You're not like excessively long back to the ball because you're such a compact dude. And I think that's why like Jose Ramirez is so nasty. And, Anthony Volpe is so good. Juan Soto's got a version of this that is, on a different level. But like Juan Soto's not a long levered guy. He's not Lewis Brinson. He's not, that lanky 6'4" dude. He like can stay short to the ball, but still be uphill through the whole zone, which allows him to hit for monster power. So I'm really excited about Termarr Johnson. He's also a hell of a kid. I've not like spent like time around him and his family at length, just like at events, at the draft, stuff like that. He's around, and he's a good kid. And I think people around baseball are really excited about him. And so am I.
You could have just stopped at his swing is sexy as hell, because
it is really sexy.
He has a sexy swing.
What's going on with him falling? There's a weird thing. Like, he's generating so much torque that he kind of falls over his front leg sometimes. Like, he will face plant in the box because of how hard he's swinging. It's kind of nuts.
Yeah, but it's also like something you kind of love.
Acuna does that.
Yeah, Cody, Pete Cody Bellinger, these guys that take a big rip like that, great.
Mm-hmm.
But like looking back at Fangraphs in general, I think would you say it's fair that you guys tend to, or maybe just you tend to favor guys that are close to the major league level when we're looking at these prospect rankings? So maybe Tamar being number 1 might be a little shocking to just people who read Fangraphs in general, and probably a little exciting.
I think it's a mix. There are definitely, the proximity thing is definitely part of it, but you want to try to have striation throughout the list, because there's a certain point where you do just value what a guy might be compared to what a different guy is. And so, yeah, like if we talk through the Pirates list, there are probably some examples on the Pirates list, and there are definitely examples on the top 100 where just like a guy's sheer upside demands that just the fact that he might become an unacquirable type of player, even if there's greater bust risk there like is a point where I do think you have to call the ball on a guy like that. It is hard to know what the threshold for that should be. And even some of these guys who are, quote unquote safe, especially if they throw a baseball for a living, they're actually not. And some of the guys who even perform up through the upper levels with the bat, they're ready, quote unquote, but big league pitching is just its own thing. And often there are things that aren't exposed until you're facing that quality of stuff every day, that can cause, even guys who feel safe to you to have been over projected on a prospect list. So there are definitely some guys where the fact that they are there, when we were talking about things that are like all else being equal, give me the guy who's closer. Now, often all other things aren't equal, but there are, enough players in the minors that there are, several instances where there are. And so, yeah, you are taking, if we have 2 players who are exactly the same in every way, one of them's at AA and one of them's in rookie ball, you have to take the guy who's in AA, like just logically. And when it's close enough, I do think that is what you want to lean on. But some of these guys, the ceiling is so big that you just have to take a guy like that over someone who feels safe.
I mean, to be fair, you guys kind of nailed Andy last year, so I think you probably had him highest of anybody.
Yeah, I have to go back through. I've been full-time at the site for about 6 years now. And so like that first batch of lists from that long ago now, like you can go back and evaluate like how I did. You could probably do it more quickly relative to the other publications because you're really just, saying like who was the best at predicting next year's list. But yeah, Andy Rodriguez is the type of player who I really like, which is like switch hitting up the middle, contact oriented. And then all the other multi-positional stuff is, gravy. So I've been a big ND guy for a while, and I'm glad that he's played this well because he's a super fun player.
Yeah, you actually, in the article, you describe Andy Rodriguez as the player that Spotify's algorithm would recommend to Fangraphs if prospects were musical artists. So, I guess go a little bit more into that. I mean, we're really excited about Andy Rodriguez. We're pretty bummed out we don't get to see him opening day, and we'll probably have to do the whole Super 2 thing with him. But, like what really excites you about Andy?
Just little athletes like this who can catch are so much fun. Like this is one of those lightning quick, twitchy catch and throw guys who's athletic enough to play other positions. And from the left side, like at the plate, his ability to really tuck those hands in and barrel stuff on the inner edge of the plate, I think is really special. And you see that trait in a lot of these, special up the middle, like the Rays have a bunch of, like Wander Franco's this type of guy where he's so compact and short to the ball and his hands are so quick that he can let the ball travel extra deep before he has to decide whether or not to swing. And guys like this just grind away at pitchers. They're spoiling, tough pitches on the edge with 2 strikes, and they're just a huge pain in the ass. And to have any sort of offensive output from the catching position is a big deal, right? I mean, think about the team that just won the World Series and what their catcher does offensively, like nothing. There's just so many other important aspects to that position that when you have someone who's like capable of doing those things and does anything at all on offense, it's a really, really big deal. Now, the risk here with Endy is most big league catchers aren't this small. Like you take a beating. You catch in 100 games a year. You're taking, barrels to the back of your head and your mask and foul balls off your inner thigh. And, for a small guy to take that kind of beating, I think it's part of why you just look around the big leagues and the guys who actually perform consistently on offense over a long period of time, like they're built like Brian McCann. They're built like Travis d'Arnaud and, Tyler Flowers and these guys who like break late. Maybe they struggle early, but they break late. Evan Gaddis and stuff like that. Like it's pretty rare for a guy to be built like Endy and be a primary catcher without having the bumps and bruises impact his offense. It's why like Austin Barnes and Garrett Stubbs and guys like this haven't really gotten a shot to be a primary guy, even though, especially in Stubbs' case, like Stubbs' minor league numbers were insane. So that's the caveat there. It's why I think continuing for him to play other positions is pretty important, because it's going to keep, some of the burden of catching off of his body. And that's also why I think it's really important that Henry Davis develops, and that, what happened to him last year is hopefully an anomaly, because I think the two of them in tandem doing a mix of both, catching and DHing probably in Davis's case, and catching and, probably playing a corner outfield, maybe some second base, but probably not. For Endy, I think that's going to be a big deal and help max both of those guys out.
Don't think I'm not going to forget that you just compared Endy to Wander.
Yeah.
It's just that short, that short lever guy.
I ignored everything else you said. You compared Endy to Wander. We're done. That's all we
I've
needed.
heard 2 things so far, right? Endy and Wander, but I also heard Tamar and Jose Ramirez. So
yep, we're done here. Jose Ramirez
all we need to know,
and
Pirate
Wander
fans.
Franco are Pirates.
That's how you
I
know.
mean, I don't know why.
I'm avoiding comps like, the plague in most of the writing, unless it's, very specifically about the body or whatever it is. Because people do like to run with that when purely a physical comp in both cases, trying to paint the picture. But
So also, like when you say Johnson's swing bears some mechanical resemblance to Bryce Harper. So he's basically a combination of Bryce Harper and Jose Ramirez.
Yeah, combo.
Yeah,
I can see
does,
why
like,
he's like that.
kind of that. Yeah, that stiff front side where, man, that rear foot is coming off the ground sometimes for Tamar because of how much of his weight is transferring into that front leg. He's just so, man.
That's cool. We got Dan Zimborski to say O'Neal Cruz was going to be a Hall of Famer according to Zip. So yeah, second time we put words in people's mouth.
You're going to go viral on TikTok now.
Man, I saw O'Neal today. I was watching both ends of the Pirates split squad guys today because I'm working on the Yankees list now. And so that was why I put one of them on. And then the other one was just to prepare for this. And O'Neal, he still is having those lapses, routine plays. And his shoulders look mighty big. Like he looks super duper strong in a way that makes me think at some point soon here, they're going to move into the outfield. I don't know what other alternatives they have at shortstop. Like if, for now, like screw it, whatever, leave him out there and see if he can make it work. But the issues that he has now are the issues that he's had for a while. And it's just stuff, like that throw today that he kind of airmailed. It's the same type of stuff, not really getting any better.
I'm ignoring everything you just said and just remembering that you said you prepared for this show.
Yeah.
We're not going to talk about anything you said negatively about O'Neal Cruz. You prepared for this show. That's all we need to hear.
I had, O'Neal's an alien, so I had him absolutely stuffed and still think that just through sheer talent, he's going to be an amazing player. But, the idea of him maxing out and being a viable shortstop is that it's arousing. So I'd like to see it happen, but realistically, probably not.
Yeah.
cut that part.
I think we're all in the same boat here with you. It's like just
Right.
ride it out and see what happens until he proves that he's not. But because if he can be a shortstop, at least somewhat passable, my God, the ceiling that he could have.
Yeah, man. Can you believe that they got him in like a nothing burger trade?
Yeah, we deserve
Tony
it.
Watson. Yeah, we
We
did
deserve
deserve
About time it was the
something
other way
here.
We
around.
do deserve like one thing as Pirates fans.
I guess, I mean, the hockey team's been great, and you had, 15 years of Yager and Crosby and Malkin and the Steelers and all that stuff. But yeah, like, I guess the baseball team's been rough. So
I'll trade the hockey team being bad for the Pirates to actually be relevant again.
that's fine. Me too.
Yeah, right.
I think that trade's happening. I think the trade happened last night.
Yeah.
I don't know, not a big hockey fan, but Pens fans weren't too happy last night from what I saw. But enough of them.
That seems to be
So
a
you're
trend.
talking about Henry Davis, and I think that's something that's very exciting for a lot of Pirates fans as well, because with the two coming up, I mean, of course, Endy kind of, not to say came out of nowhere last year, but he made a lot of jumps and very successful. The Pirates drafted Henry Davis #1 to be the future catcher. So now, you have two guys, and I think the tantalizing thing is, Jim, you're the big one that says this, but like the Varsho comp to Endy, like how Endy could play pretty much all over the place. Maybe that takes a lot of wear and tear. So you have Henry Davis, you have like your backup catcher who's like a 4-WAR potential utility player. So like Henry Davis, though, I want to talk to you about him because I think a lot of us believe the hit tool's there. Defensively, though, like, is the catcher position a legit potential position for him?
It definitely wasn't good in the fall league. Fall league catcher looks are tough because in most cases, these guys have played the whole year. Now, Davis was hurt a bunch, so that's not true for him. And also, you're coming here for 6 weeks to catch a whole new staff of guys who you don't know. And you're doing it like twice a week, and that's it. So it is hard to evaluate and like be a catcher in the Arizona Fall League. So, put on a bunch of the tape of Davis catching during the year. The throwing accuracy is the thing that is not good. Like, the other stuff he's doing, it has never been good, but he's always had a huge arm. And so you're like, all right, he'll get to a point where it's okay. Again, we were talking about it before, the types of catchers like body-wise that tend to break late and be durable and this and that. That's Henry Davis, right? And so Louisville, this guy had a monster, plus arm, but just his throwing accuracy is terrible right now. And so there's a site, it's a Japanese website called Deltagraphs. It's like the Japanese Fangraphs. It's awesome. They have like a newsletter that you can, translate in your Gmail or whatever. It's pretty cool. They did a study a couple years ago about catcher pop times, and like there's a threshold where your catcher pop time is fine, and then all that matters in like a 1/10 of a second window between like 1.95 and 205 in that like pop time window is your accuracy. That's all that matters, like in that window. And so he needs to find a way to be, his footwork really has him offline from the bag. And so that's an important detail that he's going to have to polish, but it is like a detail. There's rare offensive ability for a catcher here. Again, like the power is real. Didn't really show in 2022. I think that he had as many, he was beamed as many times as he had extra base hits in 2022. But
First
when
pitch of
guys,
spring.
what was that?
First pitch in spring, hit by pitch.
Oh yeah, no doubt. Like he's so on top of the plate, and now like part of the reason that he didn't have big power output in 2022, in my opinion, and I read about this in his blurb, is because he had fractured wrist and it was bothering him even after he returned. You see guys who have the broken hamate or something, a wrist fracture, something happens to their hand or wrist, and it takes months and months before the power's back to normal. And you see them like going into that bucket of rice and trying to like re-strengthen their hands. And so, because in the past there have been other catching prospects around baseball, MJ Melendez, Bo Naylor, they had awful seasons in the mid minors for like, no apparent reason, just terrible, like hitting a $180. I'm not exaggerating. And then, the next year, MJ Melendez like led the minors in home runs, and he's another one of those guys who can like catch and do other stuff. And Bo Naylor, had an incredible 2022, and like Cleveland put him on the 40 man. And so the rule of thumb in the scouting community with catchers is you got to take the long view. These guys are taking a beating. Stuff happens. Their offensive performance is going to wax and wane more than at other positions. And so, yeah, I didn't really come off of Henry Davis at all from my pre-draft evaluation, even though his 2022 was meh. I had a pro scouting director who saw a lot of Henry Davis in the fall league say underwhelming. Like for a first pick in the draft, very underwhelming to him. But the context of the look, again, fall league catcher, this guy's dealt with wrist injuries all year. The way he crowds the plate, he's always going to get beamed. And so maybe, he's exposing himself to more of this stuff than he has to. But because he's trying to pull everything, he wants to be on top of the plate so he can pull stuff on the outer third. Like he is just, sometimes you'll see him work away, but he really is just trying to yank everything. And I get it because he's so strong. And I do think it's going to work eventually. But there are going to be issues. He's not a perfect player. And I do think, I want a situation where like he and Endy are both getting like 400 plate appearances. And I think the fact that the universal DH exists and that Endy can play other positions allows, like, there's not really a logjam here that like the two of them together, I think is going to be a nice fit.
So what you're saying is that the Pirates should have waited a year and taken Dalton Rushing instead and not listen to the Louisville podcast that we have on here, Jim.
Yeah,
That wanted Henry Davis so badly.
Yeah, Dalton Rushing, man. How about that? That was a pretty good pick. He looked good here in the fall. Pretty good, but I don't know if he's like a 1-1. He's not 1-1 good. He's
Yeah, but they could have waited a year, just taking him in the second and been fine.
he felt like comp round good, is what Dalton Rushing felt like. I didn't feel like when I saw him in the fall that I was like, yeah, this guy should have gone in the top 15. I just thought he was a comp round early second round prospect. Pretty good still.
Mm-hmm. Let's move on to the guy who had the biggest jump on your list from last year, biggest jump in a lot of lists. Last season, you had him 23rd on the list, 40 plus future value. This year, you've got him 4th. Luis Ortiz. I know he kind of burst onto the scene at the end of the season where everybody was able to see his stuff at the major league level. How much of a part did that, like those 4 starts, play in this? And how much of it was just, you see the stuff, you can't have the guy ranked 23rd in the system anymore type of deal?
Right. Yeah. That 40 plus tier is typically where those pitchers with big stuff, but at a great distance from the big leagues, are going to live for me. That's like where I value those guys. So the evaluation of Luis Ortiz, and certainly like his stuff got better in 2022. But like the evaluation was more or less the same in that we knew this was a monster slider guy with above average velo. And then it became a monster slider guy with like elite velocity. And he's a burly dude. And the strikes haven't always been there, but things seem to click, and you watch how like powerful his lower half is and how athletic he is at his size. And yeah, you start to buy that he at least has like a 50-50 chance to start. And even if he doesn't start and it's just a ridiculous, late inning weapon, you probably still value a guy who's like big league ready in that role about this much. So yeah, like I think he's one where they have the opportunity. Like if Luis Ortiz were an Astro or if he were a Dodger, he might already be in the bullpen just because of what else those teams have around. But the Pirates have an opportunity here to, let this air out and develop at the big league level to show that there's, real command there. So I think like the big thing to watch is the slider command. Guys with 2 monster pitches, even as a starter, if we're talking about like 2 plus pitches, you don't really need a third pitch. You need a third pitch, like kinda every once in a while, probably, but you're still going to do your thing in an impact way if you've got 2++ pitches, and Luis Ortiz's fastball velocity is in that place. The shape and movement of his fastball doesn't quite allow it to play like it's a plus pitch, just more like a plus pitch. Oh no. But if the command gets to a point where, he's locating it more consistently, then maybe it can play like a plus pitch because of its velocity. Or if he's varying shape, like a sinker at that velocity paired with something that has more like riding life at the top of the zone, that's essentially gives him a third pitch. So really excited about him, and think that, like regardless of whether or not he ends up in the bullpen long term, still going to be a really great weapon, on the Pirates pitching staff for the next half decade plus.
Actually, I have a question regarding that, and something I've been wondering about for a little while, mainly regarding Ortiz, is I've always kind of leaned towards with these 2-pitch pitchers as starters that if they're going to be 2-pitch guys, they probably need to be fastball, curveball, just for the change of speed. Do you still see the success with it being fastball slider when the slider is hitting around 90, or are you more comfortable with it being fastball, curveball, like an AJ Burnett, Jameson Taillon type?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think what's interesting about that is the shape of the curveball, the more vertical shape of the curveball is going to make that pitch a more platoon neutral pitch. Like you will see guys who are fastball, slider, curveball use their curveball more often against opposite-handed hitters because the vertical action on the curveball is close enough. It's getting closer to the changeup's movement, that straight down movement and to your arm side is what you want against opposite-handed hitters. So, I think ideally that would be true, but I think there are enough guys, like I've seen Jake DeGrom and Spencer Strider and guys like that, against big league lineups, just carve with fastball slider. And some of it is because like when they're just 2 elite pitches, or even when in Spencer Strider's case, his fastball is so elite that the fact that big league hitters have to cheat on his fastball leaves them super duper vulnerable to well-located sliders, even if that slider is only like average or above. And so I used to be skeptical. I used to be pretty stingy about, projecting guys as starters with, 3 pitches. And so like I was light on Luis Castillo, who didn't really have a third pitch as a prospect. Like there are all sorts of examples. Like Framber Valdez is really just like sinker curveball. Christian Javier doesn't really have 3 pitches, especially when we're talking about guys who, like Luis Ortiz, probably funnels toward this bucket because his command is only fine. Those 5 and dive Blake Snell type starters who like don't work efficiently enough to give you 6, 7, and more often are giving you, 5, 6 innings at a time. 2 pitches when you're only going through the lineup twice is probably going to be okay.
I could just sit here and listen to Eric talk all day. I'm good.
Yeah, no, this is good stuff. So we went from fastball slider pitcher. Now let's go fastball curveball pitcher. Quinn Priester. The curveball's excellent. He's got the slider and the changeup too, but those are more secondary pitches. The fastball, like it looks good, but then like it doesn't generate swings and misses. So I guess kind of why is that? Why is that fastball like? Why can't he get people out with it? And then also like how good is the curveball?
Yeah, so great question. So this is definitely another one of those things that even just during my tenure as like a full-time baseball writer, I've had to make this adjustment where what are the things that help fastballs play or don't play? The approach angle of the fastball to the plate is one, where flat movement, or rather flat angle, like, your big time drop and drive guys, think about like Yu Darvish's delivery in your head. Think about Tim Lincecum's delivery in your head. Guys who are getting really low to the ground, the baseball is traveling to the catcher at like a flatter angle than your tall pitchers who it's coming more downhill. And this is one of those old scouting things that turned out to not be right. Like the downhill plane guys, unless it's extreme downhill plane, it's not actually not good. there are things, about fastball movement too that are hurting Priester. Think about Clayton Kershaw's arm slot. Think about Colin Poche's arm slot. These guys who have that north-south arm slot, they're creating backspin on the ball. And especially when you have a flat angle paired with that backspin, that is the fastball that's going to miss a ton of bats in the zone. That's the one that's riding vertically, and hitters are swinging underneath it a lot of the time. Priester, and it seems like, and I've got high speed of this, of his fastball from the fall league and from the futures game and stuff. Priester like pronates around his fastball like this a lot, almost like Devin Williams throwing his changeup. And so it creates like, sometimes he's doing it, sometimes he's not. So he does have like a four-seam fastball type, and then he has like a sinker type that he's pronating around. And that's where he tends to miss bats, is when he pronates and that fastball has that like sink and tail down into his arm side. He's sneaking under the barrels of right-handed hitters down there, and that works nice. But in other parts of the zone, his fastball is downhill, and it doesn't really have bat missing action. It is pretty vulnerable in there. And so, when he was really throwing hard, made it, I thought, okay. And then, during the fall league, he was more in that 92 to 94 range, which is fringe average velocity. And it's a round down onto the fastball quality because of what's happening with its angle and its shape. So, the fact that he's got movement, he can vary the shape of it a little bit. He's got that sinker version. He's got his four-seam version. He's got kind of a cutter thing that gives him, he's made adjustments. His repertoire has grown since this guy was just like, look at his body and look at his curveball, and he's throwing in the mid-90s in high school. He's really developed. And I think the fact that he's made adjustments like that is a really encouraging sign and predictor for his future. His curveball's insane. Even though, the guys who have that Tim Lincecum fastball are the ones whose curveball plays nice off that fastball because of the eye line of the hitter. Like, I'm riding the fastball past you at the letters, and no, it's a curveball. It's, it's finishing below the zone. So you have guys like Matthew Liberatore in the Cardinal system who have like sinker curveball, and like Aaron Sanchez, who used to be in the Blue Jays system, was sort of like Priester in this way too, where it was like sinker curveball, and those two don't fit so great together. But Priester's curveball is so nasty that it still really plays. Like, looking at data sourced from, a scout friend of mine from the season, Priester threw his curveball only 16% of the time, right? Like, it's that type of weapon. It's, some of this is maybe developmentally oriented, but 16% of the time for a curveball is probably a lot in today's game. Is more slider oriented. Only 2,500 RPMs on the curveball, so that's about average, but 53% whiff rate and a 44% chase rate. Those are both like monster numbers. If I'm pulling up my Z lookup for the average big league curveball, again, so Priester's was, hold on, now I lost it. It was like, close to 50% chase and whiff. The average big league curveball is 29% whiff, 27% chase. So, visually, it's a ridiculous pitch. You see the arc of the movement and the depth and the power that it has. And then on paper, even though it doesn't necessarily play so great with his fastball, it's still totally dominant. And so, yeah, like, I think these, there might be some rocky nature. Like, fastball is probably going to be pretty vulnerable. He's going to have to like sharpen the command. But yeah, I still think the components are here for this guy to be a mid-rotation piece, the type of guy who, is making a playoff team's rotation.
Well, that's good to hear.
I'm just going to shut up because I got stuck on the drop and drivers tall and fall debate that he started on, and I'll just shut up now.
One of those things I had to almost like unlearn. That
the Pirates were a tall and fall team for a long time. Jameson Taillon, Garrett Cole, both of them had to relearn basically everything, and Driveline just essentially just not Driveline alone, but pretty much everyone just overrode all that.
Yeah. And it makes sense when you think about it because, and for sure there was an overcorrection, and there were teams who had like kind of realized this out ahead of some of the others and were just collecting dudes in the draft because the market for those guys especially because of driveline, when all of a sudden the thing that you could teach guys to do, unlike ever before, was throw hard. Getting guys who had all the other stuff happening was like a market inefficiency for a while. And that's how the Astros were able to, change Justin Verlander's approach with his fastball and reignite his career. And, obviously Garrett Cole and now I think there's been an overcorrection, and certainly other teams, as front office people from the Astros went to Milwaukee and Atlanta, etc. Like the brain trust permeates through baseball. And so that thought gets brought to these other teams. And so now, the demand for guys who have, riding flat angle fastballs is through the roof, such that, now even guys who have low slots, because their release height is low, they can create like an uphill angle on their fastball that, even though they don't have that back spinning axis on their fastball, they still have that letter high bat missing utility on their fastball because they're, so low with their delivery. And so you see like Kyle Harrison, the Giants prospect, Ricky Tiedemann with the Blue Jays, guys like this who are dominating in the minors because they're just riding this low angle fastball right past dudes at the letters. And
you can go back to Tom Seaver. All those guys back then, they would drop and drive.
Koufax's delivery is like so beautifully north and south. You can absolutely see where all the breaking ball depth is coming from. He's just, beautifully over top of that pitch. And then the fastball is the opposite. It just has that riding, illusion of rise because of its ability to fight gravity. And yeah, Kershaw is the same way. Yeah. Anytime, some of these guys suck, but when you're at like a high school showcase,
yeah,
and a guy is throwing like that, you do pay attention now. Like, even though it's a thing that you learn because of data, you can apply that to visual scouting that is, sans data.
Yep, I'm going to shut up now because I will hijack this entire show and just talk about pitch mechanics. So let them talk about some prospects.
So let's get into, those are the top five right there. We'll hit on some of the other guys, but I think there were two people in particular that I think Pirates fans really, I don't want to say took offense, but that's probably the best way to put it. They took offense to your ranking. And we'll start with Nick Gonzalez. So, first round pick, Nick Gonzalez came out of college, super MLB ready bat. Everybody was saying, this guy could compete for batting titles. The hit tool, I think you guys had it at like 70, when he got drafted.
Yeah.
The comment just posted up there is Nick Gonzalez over? Is this thing done? Or what led to your 23rd ranking?
Yeah. So some of it is the defensive piece of it, where I don't think he's a shortstop. And so when you're talking about a likely second base only guy, it can be hard to find an obvious role for someone, in like a multi-positional sense. If he's not going to hit enough to just play second base every day. And so, as soon as a guy like this, as soon as I don't think that's going to happen anymore, you got to move off of him, like well below the guys who might still be a piece, of like a platoon or something like that. So in Nick's case, some of this is pattern recognition from like other guys who I've over evaluated. And other than the leg kick, which is not the same, the way Keston Hiura's hands work is exactly the same as Nick Gonzalez's. And the way Carter Keyboom's hands work is exactly the same as Nick Gonzalez's. Jeter Downs, that's another one that's pretty close. Yep. There's some guys from the left side.
Sounds like it's over.
Like this too, JJ Bleday kind of.
Oh.
Any of those guys whose hands work in like the loop, the way I would describe it is like a loop. And it's sexy because when they do make contact, there's a lot of like oppo gap, lovely oppo gap doubles, and it just looks right. Like it looks like they have lovely hitting hands and talent, and in that bat to ball area. And I bought into all of those guys, in a big, big way, at one point or another, except for maybe Blade. But at some point, the velocity at the upper levels, especially in the big leagues, has made those guys vulnerable. And Hira has other issues and stuff like with Chase. But at some point, that whole group was exposed. And there are underlying indicators with Nick Gonzalez that to me scream that this is going to happen to this guy. And I was all about him at New Mexico State too. And, throw out his triple slash line in college because they play on the surface of the moon in Las Cruces.
Yeah. It was PlayStation numbers.
Yeah. And, some of the guys here in the Southwest, you forget, like after Coors Field, Chase Field is the second highest elevation. Like the elevations here in the Southwest, they'll trick you. Willie Calhoun's numbers in junior college were also like, wow. But anyway, Nick Gonzalez. So some of these underlying indicators are obviously folks can see his strikeout rate. Some of this data sourced from, people in baseball. I've got, in zone and overall contact rates and swing and miss rates. All right. So if folks are listening to this now and go to the Fangraphs leaderboards, go to batting, click on the batting leaderboards, and then click on plate discipline, and then sort so that you're looking at the worst couple guys in terms of in-zone contact rate. Sort so that you're looking at the worst couple of guys with regard to in-zone contact rate. I'm not doing it, but
75%. Josh Donaldson, actually, at 75%.
Okay. Nick Gonzalez's in-zone contact rate in 2022 was 68%. So, what am I supposed to do? Okay. The other stuff is not bad. Like the power production, in addition to this guy went as high as he did for a reason. Okay. I understand why. And I was in on him in college as well. Not everybody was. There are people who I had some, I told you so conversations with, people over the phone as I was working on the Pirates list, people who in the past have warned me that I was being tricked by this guy. So I get it on both ends, Pirates fans. Sorry that, don't kill the messenger. I mean, you continue to shout into the void of online that I don't see, like, you're welcome to do that. But like, this isn't a cavalier process, like I'm really putting it down when I'm working on your team's fucking lists. So, and it takes a lot to like admit you were wrong about Nick Gonzalez, which at one point, yeah, like I really like this guy. So it's pretty rough when you're not mixing in real defensive versatility or like impactability on that end with an average to above power and like 30 grade, like that's a 30 on the scale is, a 68% in zone contact rate and a 63.5% overall contact rate. Like, yeah, I put a 30 on this guy's bat because that's how it's been. And so, I don't know what else to do. I'm not going to lie to you. It's disappointing. I wanted him to be good, but his infield mate at New Mexico State, Joey Ortiz, is like the better player. And it's funny that it worked out that way. I can't think of a single area scout who had them lined up like that at the time. Those are my guys here in the four corners who, I see at the field all the time. And so, yeah, it's disappointing. But when you're trying to find a role for this guy, like it's tough. It's hard. And, he might just bottom out entirely. But even if it doesn't, he's like a backup second baseman. Like, what do you think this guy is? He doesn't hit left-handed. Like, there are all sorts of dudes who just end up stacked on a depth chart higher than a guy who only hits this much.
Let me ask you this question too, because not in the same regards of Henry Davis, but Nick Gonzalez hasn't really had a whole lot of health in his pro career as well. And there's a comment here about maybe, changing his swing, with his injury last year. Like, how much do you think? You talked a little bit about Henry Davis. How much do you think maybe the injury is playing into a lot of these inefficiencies with Nick Gonzalez, and how much of it is just pure talent?
I don't know what Gonzalez's injury was off the top of my head. Certainly the fact that the injuries have made his sample size smaller makes it less dependable. But yeah, look at that. I do mention Jeter Downs in the blurb, don't I? Yeah, that's great. Good job. But like, yeah, so I don't think I have it in the blurb what the injury was. But just because the specificity of
knee, he hurt his knee at one point.
He had a hand before that.
It was a foot injury. No, he missed 10 weeks with a foot injury.
Okay. So, like Henry Davis is more specific. Like there's a track record of hitters whose power just goes away for like months and months after they've had a hamate or wrist fracture. It's just such a big, part of your ball striking power is like getting your wrist through. So here, maybe, sure.
Okay.
Are you maybe like, can we maybe buy into the second half splits that we've seen through Nick Gonzalez where he suddenly gets better after like July?
Yeah. Okay.
I didn't know
if you want.
Well, we're asking you, Eric.
It's all about, look, I have a 3 on the guy's bat. So that's what I think. But if you want to, maybe it's all about how you want to interpret that context. I don't think it's enough. Like for me, just having watched this guy swing underneath fastballs at his gut and above, like I'm scared enough that I put him 23rd. That might end up just being too high because if I'm right about what's happening with the contact piece of this here, like he's nothing at all. So yeah. I guess like I'm sure anyone who's besmirching my name, the annals of social media will be sure to send me an apology note if I end up being right. Like I bet everyone is gung ho to do that, right? But like that's just what I think. Works. So like, no, like I don't think. Clearly, I don't think that. I Eric, wouldn't buy into his second.
I got to be honest with you. Like just 2 days ago, I tweeted, "When Nick Gonzalez's swing comes together, it is a beautiful sight. It doesn't happen." And you just kind of put it all together for me. And I'm kind of annoyed with you by it.
Well, we've actually seen it in the little tiny sample size of spring training so far. Like he had the home run, I think yesterday, and he's struck out like 7 times since then. Like that's like his whole spring training.
But that home run was so pretty.
The home run was pretty, but then he just swings and misses through.
Like that swing just looked perfect.
And so, like obviously, I'm running. There's a guy who scouts for the Pirates who worked for us, so like I'm talking this through with people with the Pirates and like they think I'm wrong too. So, just so folks know, like the Pirates believe in Nick Gonzalez still and probably weren't happy about me coming off of him, but I gotta call it like I see it. And sometimes that means I gotta eat it from, past evaluations. And so it's funny because now, like, if he ends up being good, I guess I just realized this, that I could say, yeah, like he was 3rd on my draft board. Good job, me, to myself. That's who I would say it to. But now, yeah, guys, like he's almost 24, which is still okay. But double A 24-year-old guy, better rake, better be a good April and May for Nick Gonzalez.
I mean, if you look at the triple slash, it looks like he rakes ish.
Underline, yeah, like 20% above league average double A. That's been the argument that, people, including in the org, were just like, hey, like, you're going to crush this guy and I don't think it's crushing him to put a 4 on a guy to be sure, but like, but yeah, it's scary. I think there's so much bust risk there. There's so much bust risk there.
Fair enough. So there's your answer, Pirates fans. And like you did, I mean, you dropped the work's there. The work's there. It's hard to argue what you're saying.
Yeah, like, I used to be on the internet, so I know what it's like to have to, operate in there and fight. And so like, yeah, this is definitely, part of the reason it takes so goddamn long to do all my lists is because I'm trying to like really hammer away to make it thorough.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Jim.
Go ahead. I was going to move to the next guy. People
Just
are mad.
someone asked about Anthony
Yeah,
same.
Solometo.
That's where I was going. Okay, so
yeah.
the next guy.
So Anthony Solometo, a lot of people also upset with that one because, you know, dominant performance in low A Bradenton in his pro debut, you know, from a number standpoint. But we've got him at number 20, and we've got him below some other arms that I think a lot of Pirates fans maybe have never even heard of. So I guess that's maybe where some of the outrage comes from. But yeah, Solometo, why so low?
Yeah, so you'll see I got he and Hunter Barco stacked. They're at 20 and 21. They're kind of similar in a bunch of ways. They're both like pretty low slot, you know, softer tossing lefties, pretty command oriented. And like I like Solometo. He was ranked higher than this when he was a high schooler. There just isn't really the things that I'm looking for in a guy this young who's gonna throw harder over time. Anthony Solometo just doesn't have. Just not, you know, an explosive rotational athlete. Some of the athletic characteristics that, you know, I'm projecting on for velocity growth just aren't there. This is a totally subjective visual opinion of mine. Now I do think, you know, he will probably develop the command to like still be a fine big league starter, just like at the back of a rotation. That's what a 40 is for me. Like that's, you know, a fifth starter. He's sitting 90-92. So some of the stuff that I talked about before regarding like fastball shape and angle, he's doing a mix of positive and negative in that regard. You know, it's a low slot, so it's shallow angle, but it's that sinking tailing shape. So, you know, it's a mix sort of fighting, you know, about whether or not that fastball is going to punch above its weight at only 90-92. So I'm skeptical. There are scouts who I talk to who think the sink on that fastball is going to be enough to keep it off of barrels consistently, even though he's only sitting 90-92. I think that when a guy's delivery is just like long and low, that he's going to tend to be pretty platoon vulnerable. That especially when you're sitting 90-92, right-handed big league hitters just see that pitch from a slot like Solometo's forever. Like they just see it so long. And so like you guys, I'm trying to think. All right. So like Colin Holderman, right? Colin Holderman's got what I think everyone listening to this would agree is like a lower slot delivery. And he throws like 98 and he doesn't command it like Anthony Solometo does, but you can kind of still see how vulnerable and how like his fastball is not missing the kind of bats that you would expect for someone who pretty routinely sits like 95, 96 and above. So with Solometo, he's got to keep proving it to me. Those other guys who I have ahead of him, DeVito and Selby and Nicholas, like those are all guys with big time stuff who, even if they're a reliever, it's maybe an impact reliever. That 40 plus tier of relievers, those are like, if I'm putting a 40 plus on a reliever, that's like the third banana in a good team's bullpen is a 40 plus. Like your Sir Anthony Dominguez and Jose Alvarado's, those are your 45, 50 type guys because they're only relievers. So you got to, dilute them away from the top 100 type grades generally, unless it's like a Josh Hader or something like that. But, those 45 type guys, that's your stone cold setup man on a contender. And then the 40 plus tier is like impact relief still, just somewhere, multi-inning guy or, lights out seventh inning guy, something like that. Still high impact big leaguer, just in a limited role. And so that's, that Selby, DeVito, Carlos Jimenez group for me. And then Solometo definitely has a better chance to start than that whole group. If you want to put like a lower variance 45 on him and have him up there, like with Thomas Harrington at like 13, I think that's reasonable. I think, give me these power arms who I feel a little bit better about playing some sort of role. I just think like the risk that fastball is very, very vulnerable if it doesn't pick up another extra ticks over the course of Solometo's maturation. I round it down on him for that reason. So you can see him behind Jun-Suk Shim, in part because of that, because there's just more velocity there, and I just, all things being equal, like I'd rather have that guy. And in Shim's case, he's going on 19. He's a year younger than Solometo. He's going to be in the low levels of the minor leagues for the next couple of years. Probably about the same as Solometo, as far as like his timeline to the big leagues, or close to it within a year. And just give me the guy with the bigger stuff, in that situation. So yeah, if anything, I just think that Solometo's like ceiling is low, and his distance from the big leagues is high. And at maturity, he's probably someone who's in that 45 tier if he continues to prove that his command is good enough to like survive with a fastball that is this slow. But for now, while he's still a couple years away, I think I have to value him below that group of power arms who are like going to be up pretty soon.
So he's not Madison Bumgarner all over again, like I've been told 1,000 times.
I can see how people, and for sure I've made that mechanical comp too, because it does look like that. But you got to remember, like Bumgarner, well, first of all, at 20, Bumgarner was already in the big leagues.
Yeah.
Second of all, teenage Bumgarner was throwing like 96, and then he got hurt and just, he found a way to succeed, even though that velocity never came back. And now he's out of shape and making a lot of money for the Diamondbacks, and is kind of a dick to.
He's just ranching and hanging out.
Yeah, he's riding bulls and
he don't care.
Being a dick. He was rehabbing on the backfields here for the Diamondbacks, and like he was ready to go, and it wasn't quite game time yet for like the complex game. It wasn't 7:00 yet, and but he wanted to go, and so they started the game early to appease him. Umpires weren't there yet.
I love me some Mad Bum, even though he ruined my life in 2014.
He did ruin our life in 2014, that's for sure.
Yeah, that sucks. It does. I'm sorry about that.
You're not, but it's okay.
I am.
Jeez.
I'm from Eastern PA, but I don't hate you guys.
Yeah.
Well, it's because we've sucked so long. You can't really hate us. So.
No. Yeah, and Pittsburgh, like as a city, I love going there. And our website developer, Sean Dolinar, lives there, and like a bunch of my family went to Pitt, and like some of my cousins are still there, and I love going there. And the architecture of the city is incredible, and it's like I think maybe America's most underrated city and has the best ballpark. I just don't think that the top 5 pick from New Mexico State's very good.
I was gonna say that's a way to pander to the town that you just trashed.
Right.
Yeah. Basically, you hate Pittsburgh
list?
other than the bridge.
Like the Dark Knight, the third one or whatever.
Yeah, Dark Knight Rises is great.
Yeah,
Heinz Ward was great in that.
Nick Gonzalez, 3-hitter.
Well, let's go to this next guy, because I think they're all tied together. I feel like when you talk about Henry Davis, you talk about Solometo, you talk about Bubba Chandler, and of course Lonnie White. But let's go to Bubba Chandler, because I think that was also one of the things. I mean, Solometo had a really successful season. I think there's a lot of there's a ceiling to Bubba Chandler, right? But we don't know quite what he is yet. So I mean, he had the top 8 in your prospect rankings. So tell us a little bit about Bubba Chandler, what you're seeing in him.
A lot of abstract projection here, just betting on kind of a freakish athlete who has only been focusing, well, he still hasn't been focusing on one thing or another, hitting and pitching. So this is one of those where with Anthony again, totally subjective with this specific piece of it. Don't see someone like Anthony Solometo growing into, big velocity or anything like that. With Bubba Chandler, there's not really precedent for a guy like this. I mean, there are some, you see two-way players in high school, especially, all the time. And then a lot of them get drafted, and almost always one thing or another emerges as the thing that they are better at pretty quickly. And so in Bubba Chandler's case, the fact that he's done a little bit of both at the pro level at all it's kind of amazing. It's like Jared Walsh, obviously Ohtani.
Brendan McKay.
Yeah, Brendan McKay, rest in peace, Brendan McKay's shoulder. Another one that like just felt safe, right? Like he was right there.
Yeah.
Brendan McKay, I guess Joe Savory did a little bit of both when his shoulder kind of barked at him too. Those Rice guys in their shoulders.
Did Jared Jones do any two-way?
No, but he was definitely a prospect he would have been a prospect as an infielder if that was all he did. Not nearly as good as he is on the mound, but like Michael Harris was a pitching prospect. Like some teams had Michael Harris on their board as a pitcher. And Atlanta's taking a bunch of those types of guys. They drafted a guy named Seth Keller, who's like a two-way. They're going to move to the mound. I'm pretty sure. I think Owen Murphy, who they took in the first round, is also a two-way high school guy. I mean, every high school baseball player plays two ways, but both of those guys were like prospects as hitters. Certainly, Michael Harris was a prospect as both. But so yeah, like in terms of how much of the guy's iceberg you see, you definitely see more of Anthony Solometo's iceberg at this stage. You can see the things that are going to make him successful are already part of what makes him successful. With Bubba Chandler, this guy might just be scratching the surface. And so the fact that he has that like high end outcome, even though he's walking a bunch of guys right now or whatever it is, I prioritize that over a guy who I have evaluated as a fifth starter who is still a couple years away from the big leagues. Maybe someone who's like a 4 or 5 starter who's there right now. Like you can make an argument over Bubba Chandler, but in this case, and Tess was adamant about this one too, that like she's in on him as an athlete and, physically and what they might do developmentally and how things might click when he starts just focusing on pitching, which is what we anticipate will eventually happen. And so like, yeah, like that's why
the Pirates came out and said that they're going to do that this year. He's focusing just on pitching. FYI.
It makes sense based on, how he looked as a pro, but still, like it's so amazing the fact that he went out there and kind of did what he did at all. But yeah, so I mean, that makes sense to me. And then, yeah, like it's all about projection and upside in Bubba Chandler's case. And there's extreme variance there. There's extreme risk there. Ultimately, he is a barely 20-year-old pitcher. But yeah, like we just think this guy's a rare opportunity to be, a real impact arm as he begins to focus on one thing.
Cool.
So I have a couple questions for you just before, I don't know. Does anybody have any individual person questions left? Tyler?
Tell me why I love Jared Triolo so much and why you do too, because he's top 10 for you.
Yes. Oh man, Jared Triolo. Yeah, Triolo, a lot of the guys in the system sort of have this swing and approach where they really are pull oriented, like open stance. Sometimes they're bucket striding. Triolo just plays all over the place.
Very well.
And if it weren't for, Key Bryan being so good, then this guy would also just, project as like, hey, it's, a plus defensive third baseman.
Real quick before you get into that, what about Cabrian at shortstop and Triolo at third?
I'm into that.
All right.
I think that would be
That's
a better
number 2 guest that does that.
I'm into that very much. Oh yes. Certainly I think that alignment would be better than the O'Neill, Cruz, Cabrian left side, just defensively. If you just, let O'Neill go to right field and let him try to focus O'Neill on hitting, then maybe, you get more out of that immediately. And yeah, I think Cabrian could probably play short. But Triolo, yeah, like, again, so if we're looking at some of the long track record of hitting, this is another one of those guys who, even when he was coming out of Arkansas, was like a high 40 on the list, priority guy in that 3rd through 5th round range for probably Kylie and I both at the time. So if we're going back to some of the underlying metrics here to compare to like, Nick Gonzalez, Jared Triolo's in zone contact rate was 86%, not 68%. That was Nick Gonzalez's. Triolo's is 86. So, it reinforces the visual assessment of his field to hit. He's always hit. The combination of what I think is going to be, great defensive versatility, plus defense at the positions that he does play, bat to ball skill. Even the power component here is like close to average. Some of what he's doing swing wise makes me wonder if like the power is always going to be there. He does seem a little bit vulnerable on the outer third, just because of the way, he's opening up down the third baseline so consistently. But overall, high probability impact utility player, like, luxury multi-positional guy, maybe not quite like Ben Zobrist, like not quite that level of production, but definitely that type of player, right? Where he's moving all over the place and producing offensively in like more of a skillsy way than a toolsy way.
He's learned. He now said not quite Ben Zobrist.
Yeah. I mean, Zobrist is his own thing. Like definitely everyone knows like, oh yeah, like super utility guy. Like to say Sean Figgins would be wrong because there's, not as much speed and all
Love
that
me
stuff.
some Sean Figgins though.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, on the Pirates comp there, I mean, Josh Harrison kind of played that role for the Pirates for a long time.
That's a good one. Yes, absolutely.
So, all right. I actually have one question too, because I feel like typically on your all's lists and like as opposed to other publications, new international signings, like just fresh international signings, typically don't get ranked super high. You all do have Yordany De Los Santos, ranked up there, 12th on the team. So I guess what did you really like about De Los Santos in this first, season of pro ball?
Yeah, so it does take a lot to have, any kind of confidence in ranking like a DSL guy who you didn't already know about. There are nice ways to do it. Obviously, instructional league ball taking place in Florida and Arizona, a lot of those guys from the DSL will come up for that. Some of them even come up for extended spring training before they go back to the DR for the DSL. So you get an in-person look at them then. I saw the Pirates a little bit in extended last April. And I think De Los Santos was there. I have to go back through my video log, but I'm pretty sure he was there. De Los Santos was on the list 2 years ago, also pretty strong, not quite as big a grade at that time, but still relative to like where a bunch of the other fresh international guys were ranked was pretty high. Prototypical baseball frame, plus or better bat speed. I think it's probably plus bat speed. Non-zero chance to stay at short, but probably not. It's that type of guy who has the chance to be everything, where the frame is what it is and the bat speed is what it is. And it gives him the chance to stay at short, probably play third base, and hit for a ton of power. Even guys who have swing and miss question marks, which I think everybody, even guys who are performing in the lower levels of the minors, are going to have to some degree, just because they haven't faced very good stuff yet. Even if they have those issues, like Fernando Tatis had those issues, you just give yourself a chance to acquire an impact player or to, have an impact player in your system by betting on these toolsy, projectable framed guys. Some of this was a data-driven decision. Like, again, DSL TrackMan data is noisy because the quality of the pitching these guys are facing is not good. In some ways, what he was able to do from a measurable power standpoint, and I'm talking about like his exit velocities and like the top 10% of his exit velocities and like his barrel rate, the fact that they are as high as they are is ridiculous considering he's not like turning around low 90s pitching. Like, he's probably facing guys who most of the time throw like 87. And so the fact that he's turning the baseball around with like that kind of verve is kind of nuts. When you watch this guy swing, and like sometimes these kids have TikToks where they're putting highlights of themselves on Instagram and you can get a look at it. And because they're the same age as the high school players who you're seeing all year round to prepare for the draft, you can make pretty decent apples to apples comparisons with some of these guys, like athletically, swing wise, body wise. And a guy like Termar is going in the top 5. A guy, coming out of high school like Brady House is going right around 10 and Benny Montgomery right around 10. And you can see Yordany De Los Santos swing a baseball bat And it looks like those guys. It looks, in some of those cases, like certainly in Benny Montgomery's case, it looks better than those guys. So I think, there have been dudes in this system the last couple of years. Sometimes, Michael Escato, who did it before they got him, Rodolfo Nolasco, who they crush the DSL, and then they come up and, right away you see there are issues that weren't exposed in the DSL that have been by even just, full season baseball. And so that's possible here. And so, don't let your guard down, everyone. But in terms of like exciting teenage bat speed, projectable body, like, yeah, holy cow, Yordano de los Santos is absolutely in that group of teenage hitters on planet Earth who you feel like probably going to go in the top 15 if you drop them in the draft tomorrow. And I think he's very exciting. And just the potential means that I want to be on him more than some of the guys whose, ceilings are much, much lower.
Cool.
I like it. I
Yeah.
love hearing that.
Do we want to get to chat questions?
Yeah. I was going to bring this up here too, because we haven't touched on him. He's on the list. He's your number 6 prospect. I know he's attached to the Marte trade, right? That's like, he's like the saving grace of this one deal. So there's a lot of, for Pirates fans, of like, he has to become something. Not the best year last season, but still very, very young. What are your thoughts? You don't have to be too deep in this, but what are your thoughts on Peguero?
Still like Liover Peguero. His approach has always been kind of a concern. He's always had the bat to ball ability to support it, his profile anyway, especially if he stays in the middle infield. He's kind of had the yips. So I don't know if you guys watched a lot of him playing in the Dominican Winter League. He played a lot down there for Las Estrellas. No, he's Gigantes del Cibao. He's Gigantes. He and his brother both. But yeah, he kind of has the yips. So watch for that. I know he had a throwing error the other day again. If I put on the tape of him throwing from short in the Dominican over the winter, it would probably concern you. It was enough that I moved off. He was in the 50 future value tier last year. And now him and Brian Rocchio in Cleveland both over the winter kind of developed the yips. So there are throwing issues there now. I don't know what's going to happen with that. I still like his bat to ball skills a ton. I think Arizona, when they made that deal, and no one, whoever ends up with Marte just always ends up on the better end of these trades because
he's good.
I like both the guys that they traded for him. Fine. Brennan Malone, who they, obviously the D-backs took in the comp round, and Peguero both. And Malone, has a bunch of other issues, but Peguero, I still like him. He's still very, very young. There is stuff happening here now that does feel scary, but he's young enough that you let things air out over time. I think this will be his second option year, right? He was on the 40-man last year and was optioned. So it's a big year for him because you don't want no roster flexibility. You want him to be able to establish himself on the big league roster, I think, within the next 12 to 18 months. So you're not just like running dry of his options. So that's going to be big for him to settle at AAA.
I think the other part is people are kind of waiting on him to be the guy to move Cruz off a shortstop. And it sounds like you're maybe not as high as him staying there, possibly.
Not if he keeps, one hopping throws to first, like on routine plays. It's one of those things that, like, I was shocked to see it really unfold in the DR over the winter the way it was, and it never really got better. I didn't see his throwing error the other day, but I did see it in the box score, and I do think that's a thing to fixate on. As you're watching him play this spring.
So just move Hayes there. We're all good. We're all on the same page.
It's tough because would you rather have an 80 third base defender or like maybe like you don't really know how good he's going to be at short. I don't think he'd be plus. That's hard. But if we took like a somewhat pragmatic view of it and said like he's an average defensive shortstop and Triolo's plus at third, would you rather have that combo or like elite third base defense and whatever, Bay doesn't really play there anymore, right? So like, yeah, I don't know.
There's no short.
It's a hard thing.
That's the thing. Like,
it's
hard.
hard.
Listen, you talk about like Bay, it's not Nick Gonzalez.
Yeah,
not.
I mean,
the Pirates did this
long
thing
term
where they
Lamar
acquired
Johnson's.
the Pirates acquired every single like up the middle player, but none of them can actually play shortstop.
Yeah.
So hard. It's why
Yeah.
like you know,
Marcano, another one. Marcano can probably play there,
I'm
But
dicey
he
on that
can't.
one too.
Hit.
but he can't hit. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that was I was never fully tricked by that one. That was a good stay away from me.
That's
He
3
was
out of 4 on
true.
this podcast.
I remember that.
on
You
that
always
page.
had him way, way lower than everybody else. Yep.
Yeah, that's one where, you know, I loved watching him come through with San Diego on the complex. He was magical to watch. He was never striking out. But yeah, he was never a very good defensive player, and he's just so slight of build that, yeah, even though he was the age he was and like barely striking out, yeah, it was a round down guy for me just because there just aren't many big leaguers who are like built like that.
Connor asks, I know they're not technically prospects anymore, but can you please tell me you like Cruz and Castro because you made too much sense about Nick Gonzalez?
Yeah, so I mean, O'Neill, you just I don't know what's gonna happen, but I was super duper high on him as a prospect at various points. There was actually a window where I came off a little bit, probably closer to like 60 or 70 overall. But at some point, you know, when he was 21 and not long after, it was even before the trade, where he had grown like 2 or 3 inches in the span of like a year on the Dodgers backfields. And yeah, you just were like, holy crap, what's this guy going to be? He's still playing shortstop and he's 6'8" in his spikes. And, but then there's other stuff like, you know, the year he was in the fall league, there were times when he would like forget his jersey, you know, like there were just when I was watching over the course of 6 weeks in the fall league, he's not the sharpest tool in the shed. He's super duper talented, but he's not it's not like Mookie Betts or, you know, these, you know, guys where, you know, JD Martinez, where they're super duper self-aware of like everything that they're doing. O'Neill's kind of out there floating and, you know, sometimes seems aloof. And that's tough, you know, when you're trying to make that guy play the most important defensive position on the field, maybe. And, you know, to have a guy like that there, I don't know if he's going to grow up. Like, he's still 24. Our brains aren't fully formed on average until we're 25. Like, I don't know. But I hope so. Certainly he's so unbelievably gifted that I think he's going to be an impact player no matter what happens to him on defense. His approach is terrible and has always been an issue. But again, like, there just aren't dudes who look like this, who like have this much power with zero effort at all. Guys this long tend to break late too. And so, yeah, like, you give this guy every opportunity. And I really think at some point, yeah, he's going to have some seasons where he's a monster, where he's like a 7+ WAR guy with 40 homers, and maybe he runs well enough to play center field, or he's got like a crazy, you know, elite defensive first base profile, because like, it doesn't matter where Liover Peguero throws it. A guy this big is going to get it, you know, like, so yeah, like, I wouldn't worry about it. It's going to take time. He's not a polished baseball player. But yeah, like, I wouldn't sweat that one. Just let it air out and see what happens. And feel good about it, because no one else gets to have a guy like that. You know, John Morant might get hurt because of the way he plays, but I don't worry about that watching him. I'm just happy that we have a guy like that. I'm just happy we finally have a guy like that. And I think O'Neill Cruz is sort of in that bucket. Rodolfo Castro, he's another one where, like, I hemmed and hawed. The heuristics of the profile are really good. It's switch hitting, you know, multi-positional infielder with that kind of power. I do think he's going to play some sort of role. Do I think he's like an everyday infielder? Probably not. But a switch hitter with that kind of power, who, you know, in the right situation can impact the game. You got to run into, you know, bases clearing double. You need a home run later, whatever. Like, get Kevin Newman out of there. Not that he's in there anymore, but like that type of guy. Get Adam Frazier out of there. Put this guy in.
We don't trash Adam Frazier around these parts.
Frazier's great, but, you know, if you're down 3 with 2 guys on in the 8th, who would you rather have taking a cut? Rodolfo Castro or Adam Frazier? Like, Adam Frazier is more likely to move the line, I guess.
Is the phone out of his pocket?
Does he keep the phone in his pocket? I missed
Not
that
anymore.
one.
I don't know.
Not
You're on
anymore.
third with it.
You got third base, didn't get to home.
Yeah, I'm not aware of what you're referencing, but yeah,
It is.
like
His
Oh.
first game after being promoted last year, he slid into third base and his iPhone fell out of his back pocket.
It was
he got
at Chase
suspended.
Field
did?
too.
He got suspended
Yeah.
a game for it. Yeah.
oh man, my dude, yeah, you're definitely gonna get reamed out for that. Yeah, man, what was someone tell me? I forget who the player was, and I would probably censor their name anyway. But yeah, there was a point where like someone was telling me about a prospect who was doing stuff like that, like had their phone in the dugout, was like, bringing food into the dugout from like the clubhouse, like eating a full meal, like sitting in the dugout. And someone had to be like, son, like you're a professional baseball player now. Like you need to cut this shit out. And so, yeah, the phones, sometimes I could see it's reflexive. You just kind of throw the thing in your pocket. I'd rather throw it in my pocket than lose it, which is, a problem I have. And so, whatever, it happens. He was a 22-year-old kid, but yeah, like switch hitters with this much power who can play the infield, pretty rare thing. So I think he's a nice bit player to have around.
I've always kind of maybe, I don't know if you agree with this, compared him to Odor.
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
That type of player.
Yeah.
It's just pop, but he's not going to be a guy you really want every day.
He's still, he's the line he had in like 200 and whatever it was plate appearances last year is probably about what you can expect. I bet he had, probably slugged like 440 or something like that.
He had
And
like a 77 WRC plus, so it wasn't great, but
oh, really? All right.
It wasn't
I'm
great.
surprised by that.
No, Castro was above average. He was like 104.
Yeah.
I don't feel like he was above average. Maybe I'm looking at his
doesn't matter what you feel.
He was 103. 103.
okay, well then
Yeah.
his I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Was it like 277 expected or like 290 or something like that? Crazy.
Oh, maybe it was worse than. Yeah, okay. I have his player page up now. So yeah, power derived. Yeah, you're on it. Like maybe he will regress based on his expected WOBA, but yeah, still like this guy as a piece coming off your bench. Complimentary guy.
I had part of it right. Like that'll work.
You were
It's so
you were
hard,
quite
like-
a bit off there. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
look at
usually right. Leave me alone, Jim.
No, you're good.
Some
How
of
about
these
this?
teams-
So
Go ahead.
there's a certain segment of Pirates Twitter who, for some reason, has a lot of positive vibes around Travis Swaggerty. I've been arguing with them a lot lately.
I am
'cause
one of
think
those
otherwise.
fans with
So-
positive vibes.
So, is there
I'm
any
not.
reason why the Swaggy T crowd of Pirates Twitter should be positive?
Yeah, I think if the thing that regressed in 2022 was his defense, like the defensive part of it was it seemed like it was in place and was just going to be a foundation of his skill set that you didn't have to worry about. So even if some of the stuff that, were the concerns when he was drafted, like, his swing doesn't really have any lift and stuff like that. Even if that stuff never happened, you always had the defensive part of it to fall back on. And, at the very least, he was going to be like a useful role player. And then you talk to people from last year and, he just regressed on that end with what scouts were talking about, like having watched him play defense. And so if that rebounds to what it has historically been for him, then yeah, like he's a viable defensive center fielder, feels fine as like a fourth outfielder, maybe more like a fifth outfielder in today's game, because often like your fourth outfielder is just part of a platoon. Like Manny Margot isn't really a fourth outfielder, but he gets like a fourth out, he basically is when you really ordered the Rays depth chart, but like he's playing more than just a fourth outfielder. And so like that could be the type of player that Travis Swaggerty is if his defense returns. And so that's the thing to watch. But I've always been a huge Swaggerty fan. Was a big time Swaggerty proponent before he was drafted, hoping that the swing change I mentioned would come, and it really didn't, and he's just sort of plateaued and fallen away a little bit here, enough that even though like my personal tastes historically would be to 45 a player like this, the sentiment around baseball was that he probably belongs more in that like 40 tier where I had him. But yeah, fingers crossed. that he can go get it in center again and be a cog for the big league team.
I've always been a Swaggy T guy. And before the injury, he made a slight swing change that I really, really liked. And then he got hurt and kind of shit at the fan. But
yeah, the injury stuff sucks for him too. It's been pretty.
It was like the second game he like ripped his shoulder up. But at this point, maybe it's because I'm an Ohio State Buckeye fan, but I love me some Kanan Smith and Jigba. Tell me why I should love him. I just love the approach, dude.
Yeah, I get it. It's hard. Again, it's really hard to find a role for a guy like this. I think he's going to be great in Korea or Japan.
That was the meanest thing you've ever said.
I know, right?
It's not meant to be like, think about the guys who go over there. And anyway,
I'm going to Baseball America for my news now.
That's fine. I forget that's how people tend to decide where they go for whatever, whether it's baseball or other news. It's just like, who agrees with me? So yeah, Kanan Smith and Jigba, obviously you're right. His feel for the zone is fantastic. And he's a Smith and Jigba, right? Of the Jackson Smith and Jigbas. And so there's uncommon athleticism there. There's also above average to plus raw power there. The swing has never produced in-game power. Yeah. When you're a left field only guy defensively, there's got to be power there. Unless you're like Brett Gardner or Quan or something like that. And, I like Kanan Smith and Jigba, but he's not those guys. And so, even like Vogelbach type guys who don't really have a position at all, Rowdy Tellez, they got to have that power to play the role that they play as that low end first base DH type guy, Garrett Cooper, Justin Bohr, these guys who are corner only towards the bottom of the defensive spectrum. They have that little 3-year peak where they're really good. And overall, when you're looking at them against all the first basemen across baseball, like they're in that bottom third of, your everyday first base type guys, which is a 40. And so, that's where I think Kanan Smith and Jigba is at. I think it's a super duper crowded field of guys like this, like Ryan Velotti, who also doesn't have power, but has other interesting, bat to ball skill, more than the approach piece, which is really driving Smith and Jigba's prospect bus. And Andujar and like guys like this who you
just said two guys that stink really badly.
But these are but the approach is to take a buy low opportunity on those guys, right? Like falling off of another roster. Let's try it. Can we fix something here? Can we tweak something here? I kind of get it, but with Kanan Smith and Jigba, yeah, he's fine. He's like at the very low end of the types of guys who occupy that 4th and 5th outfield role for a contending team. And some contending teams don't behave that way at all. Like the Padres don't platoon anybody. They're just trying to make a team of like all stars.
They get a $5,000 million payroll.
Right.
Ideally
you want to like compete, right? So you have to do the Rays thing where you're pairing dudes together and like Voltroning together a 4-win player out of like 2 guys who you're just putting in position to succeed, like with one another all the time. I guess like the Dodgers have done this too, where like Chris Taylor's moving around, right? Muncy, Taylor, Jock Peterson, they're all kind of moving around, platooning kind of with one another, and Taylor's versatility really facilitated that. And so like maybe Kanan Smith and Jigba has a bit role to play in something like that. But quite often when you're an outfield corner guy, there's just got to be power. That has to be because there are just enough guys floating around who have power. Like Adam Duvall is old, but he still has a ton of power. And that guy tends to get a job, in the sort of role that you could hope Kanan Smith and Jigba might play.
Well, maybe Kanan Smith, I'm going to go back to another former Pirate. Like maybe he can piece together a Jordan Luplow type of career.
Sure. That's interesting. Yeah. Luplow, also a guy who, like, if you told me he's going to be Jordan Luplow, like, it'd probably 40 plus that guy. It's in a 40 role as like the shorter end of a corner platoon, but he destroys left-handed pitching, like with an uncommon level of power. So I want to accelerate where I've got a guy like that a little bit higher, but yeah, like I could see how you're arriving at that.
I just want to point out he called Jim old.
He is.
You're
And
old,
Duvall?
Jimmy.
Me? What did I do?
Well, if Duvall's old, then you're old by association.
Oh,
And I am too.
Ooh,
then.
I went to class with him.
I did. I went to school with Duval.
Nice.
Quick question here.
Good.
And I asked this just because I think this is what everyone on a lot of people's minds, because when the Pirates tank for so many years they have right now, you expect their farm to at least be good in the top tier. And I think what a lot of these rankings this year with you guys and a lot of others have kind of shown that maybe they're not as good as people hoped for. So maybe just like, what is your overall feeling on the farm system compared to the rest of the league?
The way we do the farm system stuff at Fangraphs is like I don't have like my gut checklist of farm system rankings. Craig Edwards, who now works for the Players Union, when he wrote at our site, he did like prospect values, basically like based on where a guy is ranked, about how much war value is there later on. And so it is obviously my evaluations are subjective, but the way the farm system rankings are generated from all of my evaluations of the players is more objective, where it's just taking my evaluation and associates a value with that evaluation. And then the entirety of the farm system is added together. And so at the end of last year, and, some guys have pulled off graduates who, Gabriel Moreno graduated and this and that. Like, there are definitely things that impact this. I had the Pirates third at the end of 2022 after Baltimore and Cleveland. The way Craig's math worked out, his math likes top-heavy farm systems. So the fact that the Pirates still have 3 guys who are in that 55 tier, in the top 40 or so guys who I have evaluated in the minor leagues, they're still going to be high in the farm system rankings because of the way Craig's math tends to work. I think that sometimes our expectations and whether or not they are met can have an influence on how we're evaluating the outcome. And I think that that's happening here. And I know that I'm like preachy old man on his porch, but like, I think the internet inflames that dynamic, especially like on Twitter, where you're just like, why, Brian Reynolds is going to get traded. And like, why isn't, Jared Triolo up or whatever it is. And so stuff like that happens. And it feels like Henry Davis didn't just go right to the big leagues and be awesome. He had a developmental hurdle, which is just what happens to a lot of these guys. And when like, Nick Gonzalez is what? Like the Fangraphs guy thinks he's what? Like that stuff is relative to your expectation. And so it feels not great. And I think our tendency is to fixate on some of that stuff. But I still see like a really healthy farm system. Some of the developmental stuff I would like to see be better, because this isn't an org that like, cranks out the random like the Yankees do, where it's like, hey, this 9th rounder from Dallas Baptist is a dude now. The Pirates don't really do that. Sometimes it happens, like I like Colin Selby a lot and some of these guys, but it hasn't been a thing that's really happened from the guts of the system.
I'm really glad you said Yankees and not Cardinals.
Right. Yeah, they're another one, right? But like the Yankees and like the Dodgers and stuff, you see the thing happen. Like Will Warren in the Yankee system has a breaking ball that the Yankees gave him. The Yankees saw Clay Holmes and his data and his, whatever.
We really needed
right?
that.
But like, I'm sure but before the Yankees got Clay Holmes, that they knew they were going to do to his sinker what they did to his sinker. And
it happened immediately. So yeah,
the Pirates don't seem to be as in touch with some of that stuff. And so sometimes when you're seeing that pattern throughout the system, things do feel like they're kind of tenuous, and as though this depth has been created and the farm system quality has been more created through like the fire sale and the fact that they're drafting high, rather than like a truly sustainable thing, which I do think requires that player dev component. And so that is one thing that, does bother me about what's happening. But in general, I think the system is good. there's going to be attrition. Like guys just bust. So like Lonnie White, the fact that he's been hurt, that's not a great sign. And like that's a guy who was a 2-sport athlete who, needs reps and he's not getting them. And so like stuff like that just happens and it's not anybody's fault. But the amount of pitching in the system, I think what they've been able to do with Burrows, who if he can stay healthy is a top 100 type of guy, and just gives you those 3 young arms who are just about ready to make an impact. And, bit players like Bay and Triolo and some of the guys who we've talked about that the things do feel pretty good, especially in your guys' division, which I think is pretty open over, the Cardinals are obviously legit, but some of those pieces are old and those are really important pieces for them. And if some of those guys go belly up, which tends to happen, like look at Anthony Rendon, sometimes stuff like that happens and you're up shit's creek. And so I think the division is pretty open and that over the next couple of years, hopefully some of these guys will continue to establish themselves, especially Endy and Cruz and Hayes. Ideally Hayes would start hitting for more power. I don't know. What feels like a good return for Reynolds? Like what does the internet want for Brian Reynolds?
Everything.
An extension.
Yeah, I think for the most part, we don't want to trade him. But if he is traded, it's there's got to be top talent coming back.
They have to.
And,
yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I wonder what some of that would look like. Like,
well,
they've been
yeah, I mean,
close
looking at the
times.
teams who are,
I think it's
it's
at least a top 20 prospect plus another maybe like top 100 fringe-ish type of guy.
Like you want. I just think Miami has the pieces that could.
So, like,
make
you also need him closer to the major leagues. It's just not a good fit for anybody right now.
I think it makes
Miami
the best
does make
fit for
sense.
Miami, but they've got to be willing to part with
my
really
boy
good talent.
Yeah,
I don't know if they are. So
I would twist their arm until people's job security down there. Once that becomes threatened, then I'd be like, yeah, you're going to trade him to me.
I would just
because I know what you're talking about without you even saying it, and you're right.
Right.
Yeah. I would absolutely just be like, honey.
And I think that's kind of what Ben Cherington is holding out for. Like he's waiting for somebody to panic.
Yes.
And needing to win right now and offering up something like that in return. Yeah.
Miami's smart. Like they know they have other alternatives. And I think Ramon Laureano they've been in the market for him the last, of course, a bunch of these teams, especially with Oakland and you guys, some of these discussions have been ongoing for a while. And so I think that, Kim Eng will be patient too. Like she knows what she's doing, but, and she knows what she has at the top of her farm system and is going to be loath to part with that guy. But they have so much pitching that if she thinks that Edward Cabrera might break, or, if you guys still like Sixto Sanchez for whatever reason, or whatever it is, then yeah, a package around some of that surplus pitching that they have would maybe feel okay. But I'm with you guys where I just think he's a dude. Just keep him around. The same way shortstops are hard to find. And it's why like Sergio Alcantara gets traded for something every year. Because sometimes you got to have a guy who can actually play shortstop. It's true in center field too. Like people have traded for Bradley Zimmer a bunch of times over the last couple of years. And, the Blue Jays just desperately needed a center, so I think as I was working on some of these positional baselines for like the data that we got after the minor league season, to compare the metrics that we had for the minor leaguers to like what big leaguers were doing in each of those individual metrics. I was averaging segments of the player population. So like everyone who played shortstop during the year and the average of like the top 30 shortstops, because if I'm like trying to gauge if a guy is going to be a big league regular, that seemed like the group to cluster together is like the top 30 guys and what are they doing on average. And finding enough center fielders for a thing like that is hard because there are only like 45 guys who can actually play out there. enough that they had like sufficient plate appearances for me to consider the data meaningful. And so, yeah, like the fact that Brian Reynolds, man, like you stole him from the Giants, like keep him. It's a big dub, nutting. But yeah, like it's a tough situation to be in. It's not an enviable situation for, the Pirates front office to be in, to have the budgetary constraints that they do, especially when there are teams like the Mets and the Dodgers who reach into the couch cushion to give Blake Trinan $15 million or whatever as like an injured flyer that they teach an elite breaking ball to. Like that's just not a thing that the Pirates can decide to do. And the Dodgers take a chance on a guy like that every year where they're just like, yeah, this guy was basically non-tendered, but let's give him $12 million because we think we can do what we did with Blake Trinan, and then what we tried to do with Corey Knebel, and then what we did with Evan Phillips. Like that's a separator that, again, like the investment in technology and like catching up on a data warehousing and infrastructure from that perspective. Like the Pirates had to do all of that when Cherington was hired, and it takes time just to build that technological infrastructure, let alone start to implement it in the draft room and on the backfields with your dev group, and like get the people who understand those things into your organization. And it's so hard. But yeah, I do think that things are looking up. I hope, probably not this year, but I think the pieces, you've started to see them trickle in and arrive. The pieces of the next good Pirates team. I do think Brian Hayes and Brian Reynolds and O'Neal Cruz are absolutely going to be a big part of that. And so will some of the guys at the top of the system.
All right, Eric, we'll end it on I don't even know if you have this answer yet, but we're looking at the Pirates as a number 1 overall draft pick this year. Who do we got there? Is it Dylan Cruz? Jason Dollinger?
Yeah, I've got I saw Dollander a couple of weeks ago. He was fine. He's the type of guy who, it's not like he's Strasburg or anything like that, but he's pretty consistent with the best college pitcher in a draft. He'll probably go somewhere in like the top 5 or 7. I have Dylan Cruz 1. Folks can go to the Fangraphs and hover over prospects and click on the board and then click on MLB draft, and you'll see where the draft list is at. I updated it right before the college season started. And yeah, Cruz has basically been really, really good the whole time. Like high school sophomore Dylan Cruz was exciting, and he's basically been great his whole life. There's a little bit of swing and miss there, sure, but there's just so much power. He's got a good chance to stay in center field. I think that fatigue from him, be wary of that. Like he's been at the top of this group for years and years. When he didn't sign coming out of high school, he was the best unsigned high school guy. And so, he's just been tracking as the best guy in this group for a long time. And I think that, I'm certainly guilty of this at times, have a tendency to get fatigued of guys like this. And so like there's Wyatt Langford and but I just think that Cruz has been so good for so long and so consistently so that's my guy. And I think he's pretty special. An amateur scout who's an area guy with the team in your division sent me his scouting report on Dylan Cruz the other day, and wow, like he's got 7s and 8s all up and down that scouting card. I don't think things are quite that big. He told me he thought as soon as Dylan Cruz is drafted that he should be a top 5 prospect in baseball. So I think, folks should watch LSU in general because a bunch of those guys, they're just so much fun. And they have a bunch of those guys who are probably going to be in the mix for teams in the top 10. And, I think it's Dylan Cruz number 1 with a bullet. But if we start picking nits, which you have to at the very top of the draft, and there's, I have, the data from his career doesn't send up any red flags to me immediately. But if you start to go, actually, there's this thing that actually, just pulls him down into that group with like Langford and Max Clark and stuff, then maybe you do what they've done in, with Henry Davis basically, and like cut a deal at 1. But at some point, don't you just want a guy who might be like a superstar rather than a guy who's just fine and a bunch of other lottery tickets?
So basically you're saying just don't get cute.
don't get too cute with it. I think that there's a guy in a tier on his own in this year's class, and that sometimes it's just hitting you over the head. But yeah, I'm a big Dylan Cruz guy. I think it's a pretty deep draft. I'm excited about it. And do you guys have any comp picks too? Do you guys have like a bunch of comp picks that?
We actually, I think this year we do not. I think our comp picks in the second round.
Okay.
I think I could be.
It's a good draft to have like 3 picks in that top 45 or 50. I feel like there's so many fun high school guys.
Then the Pirates won it.
All right, so they've got comp B. So it's 1, 42, and 67. That's okay. Some of those teams operating in front of you guys in the second round are going to make things interesting, though, because Seattle has 2 comp picks, so they can go buck wild and get really creative. That 29th overall pick is from Julio winning Rookie of the Year. That's freaking cool. Julio was worth everything that he was on the field and a first-round pick.
Yep.
Imagine giving your player that opportunity.
Can't relate.
Yeah.
Well, cool. So Cruz it is. I'm down with it.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, the guys I have up in that mix are also like Braden Taylor from TCU, who just, he's the more generic, like safe guy. Lefty stick, third base, although looked pretty rough at third last weekend from what I was watching. Wyatt Langford at Florida. This is, bodybuilder type guy with huge power, and he can really run fast in a straight line, but he's not a good defensive player. His feel for the outfield is not good. So that's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out. And then Max Clark, the high school outfielder in Indiana, who is like, what Corbin Carroll was in high school is sort of how Max Clark looks, where you're like, yeah, this is, this guy's really skilled and he really smacks the crap out of it, but it's all ground balls and line drives and he really runs. It's sort of like an old school leadoff hitter. And then Corbin Carroll got in the gym and, now he's going to hit 30 bombs. And so maybe Max Clark is the other guy where there's enough ceiling. The other one to name is Arjun Namala from Florida, high school shortstop. Maybe that guy really explodes. That's the dark horse name at this stage, where just, the fact that he's going to be shy of 18 on draft day, how much power there is already for a guy his size at his age. Yeah, that's a name that Pirates fans should look up. Arjun Namala. Do some background on that. There's a scouting report on the site, but I'm sure there's been other stuff written about this kid. I think he's of Indian descent, and I think he's got cricket in his family and all sorts of other baseball-y adjacent stuff that is pretty cool. And I'm really interested in him as well. He's the one guy as I'm looking down the list who, if you're who's going to be Jackson Holiday, and take BP in front of scouts in the spring and look like he's added a full grade and a half of power while staying at shortstop, that's the other guy.
Cool. Well, I think that wraps this up. Honestly, a lot of great information. And as much as, we talked about how the Pirates fans hate you for this list, honestly, there's a lot of optimism as well with the things you said. So it was nice hearing you talk it through, hearing us, but again, hearing other things come out. It's okay that maybe Nikki G might not make it, but you heard about De Los Santos, and that's got to make you excited too.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, my goal is definitely not to anger the internet with my prospect analysis, but I understand the frustration, and you got to take it out on somebody. So it's going to be me and Tony D'Angelo and Claude Giroux and those guys. That's fine.
Hey, man, Bob Nutting's not on the internet, so what are we going to do?
Yeah, what do you do about that? That would be, I don't know.
Yeah,
maybe we should talk about that.
What if Nutting was online as much as Cohen? What are we
going to do about the billionaire?
That would be interesting.
It would be kind of interesting, I guess. Is Cohen really super duper online still?
Oh,
not super duper, I don't think anymore. Okay. But yeah, he does. He's the most vocal owner.
Yeah,
I would think
he's
Middleton's kind of vocal too. He talks every now and then.
Yeah, they were talking about that on their the spring broadcast the other day, the Philly spring broadcast, that he's like shagging balls in the outfield with guys. That's kind of weird.
That's interesting. I
Nobody-
definitely don't see Bob doing that.
Nobody run over your owner, blow your Achilles and like plow your owner into the ground.
Yeah, no.
Your owner, what a weird thing.
Right. Well,
Thanks, boys.
Yeah.
anyways, yeah, no, for sure. Thanks for coming. We will have those thank you cards. We'll have them mailed to us in 2 years, and then we'll send them all to you saying thank you. And we apologize for all the bad words they said.
Yes. Yeah, apologize.
All right. So once again, Eric, Fangraphs, thanks for coming on. Everyone else, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.
Sucker Scouts.
See you guys.
Good night, guys.